You've reached Monster 911, and I'm Lance Hightower. I've been taking cryptid emergency calls for over 5 years. If you have a cryptid emergency, please call our toll-free number, 866-306-8085. I can help you. What's your emergency? Welcome back again, guys, to Day 2 of the series, The Kansas Bigfoot. This is Lance Hightower, and you've tuned in to Monster 911. Today's show, our guest continues on with her odd and strange encounter stories with her and her son out of Kansas and the Bigfoot attack. And guys, this show is one for the books, so there's parts that are a bit graphic and very terrifying and are really not suitable for children's ears, so use some discretion, parents, on this show and some of the others. And tomorrow, you absolutely do not want to miss show 3, I promise you. When you hear it, you will have a different opinion about the state of Kansas. And so we take it seriously. We have people calling.
I think what he's wanting to do is we know, because we've been out in that area, we've lived there for pretty much most of our lives. He's lived there all of his life. He was born in that county. We know a lot of people around there. We know a lot of people. And, you know, he's concerned that somebody's going to get hurt. And he wants that thing dead. He wants them dead to ensure that nobody gets hurt.
Here's the factor that's hard with that, and I don't blame him a bit. This is not something you definitely want to make your pet. It's not something, again, to be taken lightly, but here's the problem that we run into. These things are so fast, so elusive, and so sleuthy. They're very smart. So you can't fool their nose, and you can't fool their sight. But what you can fool is their hearing. And that's the only thing. That's what Wiley Dave says. You can fool their hearing if you're really good at knowing how to call them in. So that's the first thing. The second thing is you better have a firearm that has enough energy behind that ammo. You've got to have at least a high-powered rifle with a good ammo load, like a 300 Winchester mag, a 308, a 45-70, 30-06.
Yeah, he's actually looking at a 308 right now.
So
when I was talking to him today.
Then you want to look at something with ballistic tips. Hornady makes some really good, commercial ammo out there, unless someone's reloading their own. But the other thing is, I personally wouldn't body shoot these. I would go for soft target areas of the head. That is just from experience of other people making shots and having a problem bringing these things down. In fact, not bringing them down. Head shots in your eye socket, ear area, mouth area tends to work the best.
Yeah, now see, his brother that he was taking out there, he has a 45. And I'm not sure what he was taking out there that second time when he took his brother out there, but at that time he only had a 357. He really honestly did not feel that 357.
Most people don't feel what they bring is big enough. That's the consent. And I've had some people bring a 45-70 Marlin, and they said, I didn't have a big enough gun. This is way too big. So now I've had a few people I've interviewed that have had a headshot. One person in particular had a 45 revolver and had extremely powerful loads and shot at about 4.5 to 5 feet in a side shot, temporal area, and it took it down fast. So that's the thing, that it was close and it was a direct blow. And this was a big one. This was out in Michigan, and it was in a preserve area, and it was a semi-truck driver, and he didn't want to be on, so I did the narration. This thing was running alongside the semi-truck, and when he shot it, it was actually running alongside the semi-truck going uphill. He shot this thing with the windows down as he was going uphill with a semi-truck, and he shot it right out the passenger's window.
Wow.
And he saw it in the side mirror. He said, Lance, it was as big as a horse. He said it would do and he was a savvy woodsman all his life. He said, Lance, I'm telling you right now, this thing weighed about 1,000 pounds. 1,000 pounds. It was the size of a horse, but it was a canine. It had a tongue about the size of a cow. It was massive, massive. And when it hit with such force, and he could see that he must have killed it because its arms and legs were sticking straight out. But here's the thing, the kicker of this whole thing, when it failed hard, he saw it in the side mirror, he saw another one come out of the timber and drag it off. There was two of them.
I was going to say, that's what I'm finding out. They do not, they run in pairs. There's at least pairs.
Yes.
And it's like I said, I know that there's going to be at least two or maybe three, but he said that there's, take his brother out there, tell him his brother, what he saw, what he found out, and, he's looking it up. And I know I'm going to keep talking to him and try to talk him out of it. I really am.
Well, here's the thing. I've been hunting coyotes and every kind of canine. Wolves, and Wiley's been doing it 40 years. And he's actually was professional. In other words, farmers paid him to take out the coyotes all the way from Montana, Washington, Utah, Oregon, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, Nebraska. He's been all over. We have spent hours on having backup plans, because you be careful what kind of fight you pick. It may be more than you can bargain for, because
well, that's kind of what I've been trying to tell him is these things are not, I've learned, I haven't learned enough, but I've listened to you guys and I've read up on them as much as I can find, and I've told him, I said, you really need to read up on these things. If you really want to kill your enemy, you always have to know your enemy first. That's how it is. You have to know everything that you can about them, what their habits are, how they hang out, where they sleep, what they do, what they eat, every single solitary thing. And I said, son, you don't have enough knowledge.
Yeah, I would be careful, because even with all the experience that we have, I tell people don't do it. Let someone that, even with all the experience we have 5 in our team, and we know our firearms inside and out. We've practiced thousands and thousands and thousands of times. And even when we go out, we're still a bit on edge and nervous because of what we know. These things have been known to open doors on homes, on cars. They know how to unscrew light bulbs. They know how to take false lock off latches. They know how to open gates, barn doors. They know how to climb in the barn upper loft. They know how to climb in trees. They know.
Let me ask you a question. Back in 1990, we were living out on a farm, and our nearest neighbors were miles away from us. And we had some cats. We had several cats. And we had a farm that we had animals and stuff like that, but we also had a home in town, and we had decided to spend the night in the home in town rather than go out to the farm. We went to the farm early that morning to feed the animals, and our cats were laying on the sidewalk, and they were laying from head to butt in a row. There was 4 of them, and they were all dead, and there was one laying just in the yard, about 5-10 feet away, about 5 feet away. They had puncture wounds in their bodies, and one had its throat completely slit. And there was absolutely no blood anywhere. Nowhere. But these 4 cats were laying head to butt in a row on our sidewalk when we pulled up there. Now, there was 2 cats that survived. They had not been ripped open. Their fur had not been matted, but they had puncture wounds. And one looked like his throat had been slit open with something very sharp. And there was absolutely no blood anywhere.
Were they laying on their back?
On their sides.
On their side. And the puncture wounds, what did they look like? Was it a slit?
It looked like something had bit it. And the one that had its throat slit, they had a very sharp, it looked like maybe they had a very sharp claw mark. It was very weird. Our pig, we had a I'm trying to think how big he was. He was about 300 pounds. And he was out of the electric fence that we had him in. And he had run over there was a dirt road right next to our farm, and he had run over into that and was hiding up in the tree line that was across the road. The fence had not been messed with. The electrical fence was on. We had that happen several times. And at first we didn't have the electric fence. So then we put the electric fence in thinking that would stop it. It didn't. It happened several times after that. Would those things do anything weird like that?
Yes. Yes. I had a gentleman that he lived kind of in the east, and he knew something was up where he lives. He lives right next to a creek, and he kept having these. It wasn't domestic, but it was some wild, small critters left by this little shop door he had, and they were slit open, no blood, and he would find like a raccoon, rabbits, I think is what it was initially, and they would just be left on their side or on their back and slit, no blood, and it was in front of this door, and it was...
Yeah, this sidewalk was right as you get to the front porch, there's a sidewalk there. That's where they were.
Yeah, and so the best that he could tell, and that even I could tell, is that it was left as a gift. It was either, to him, since it wasn't a domestic, he didn't really have any cats in the area, but it was almost like it was gifting him. So he didn't know what it was. This is kind of after the fact. He kind of came up with this thought of what this thing was doing. He just eventually he came face to face with this creature, and it was the best we can tell, it had an affinity for him. It was a female, but it was leaving these dead animals in front of his shop door. Now, I can't say that is exactly what's happening in this instance when those cats are there. That's with them lined up. I don't know. I don't know if that was a statement or if that was a gift, but the fence issue, that's something that they are very good about. They know how to get over electric fences very easily.
Yeah, because this was a high fence. I mean,
Yes.
we had a pretty decent fence there to begin with, and then we put up the higher fence, and we made sure. We did everything we could to try to keep that pig in there, and we just couldn't figure out, because it wasn't like there wasn't a hole where he had dug up underneath it, or it was like something had just picked it up and turned it loose. Thing was that we also, while living there, we had a big giant garden. We were the kind of people that we raised the pigs, sold a pig, butchered a pig, used that money to, butcher a pig. So our freezer was full of pigs. We had goats. We also had a big garden, and I canned. And my daughter, one afternoon, one of her favorite things to do was to go out there and rob the garden, the vegetables. And she was out there, and she was about 5 at the time. And she comes running into the house, and she says, Mom, there's a really, really tall man with red hair on the other side of the fence. And I said, where? And she said, in the back of the house on the other side of the fence. Well, on the back of the house on the other side of the fence was land that nobody used. The weeds were 6-7 feet tall. It was just wild brush land, full of weeds, trees, and nobody ever used it. It hadn't, I don't know how long it had been abandoned back there. And so, of course, I'm thinking, well, she's 5, she's probably imagining it, but I'd never known her to act like that. Never. So when she said, Mom, he's back there. And she was dead serious. I said, okay, well, I'll go look. I went back there, and there was nothing. There was no one back there. The weeds, nothing looked like it had even been walked through. Yeah, she said it had red hair, real long red hair all over its body.
Oh. So this may have been a Bigfoot that she saw.
Yeah, it was about 12 miles out. Let's see, I'm trying to think without telling people exactly where it's at, because people live there now.
I'll scrub it out. I'll just bleep it out. So
it was between area and area out on highway.
Okay.
There's a farmhouse out there about probably 8-9 miles out of on highway as you're headed out toward.
Well, that's probably what that was then. Is not so much not to say that you can't have a standing dog man that's red. I've never heard of one being read, but what I have heard of being read, especially a 5-year-old that can tell differences in colors, they're starting to learn their colors. I suspect she saw.
Yeah, she was super smart. She was 2, 3 years old, and I was teaching her how to read words.
So I suspect it was red or orange in color or in auburn, and I bet she saw a Bigfoot. And
well, I wondered because we had, like I said, we had some very weird things and some odd things going on out there, and that was part of the reason my husband wanted to sell the house in town and just move out there permanently, and I was like, no. On many occasions, I would be out there by myself, and we'd have the windows open, and stuff, and I would hear things that sound like somebody walking around the house, and I never felt relaxed or comfortable there at all. Something just felt really wrong, and there was a lot of times when I felt I had a real sense of dread and fear, and I just couldn't get comfortable out there at all. I was one of those that, if you want to stay out here on this farm, perfect, great, go for it, but I'm staying at the house in town.
Well, I always tell people, go with your instinct. If something, the human mind wants to always figure things out, but if you're at a point where you can't figure something out and people are just stuck, like, I don't feel comfortable, but I can't tell you why, there's some strangeness going on, I can't connect the dots yet, but just something, whether you want to call it your spidey senses or the Holy Spirit or just a sixth sense, I think those abilities are put in people for preservation of life, for survival, and that's how God made us. And everybody wants to understand, but I tell people, go with that instinct. If it says get out of there, get out of there. Worry about later why, but don't paralyze yourself on trying to question it too much. If something says you need to leave, you need to get in the house, you need to lock your door, you need to drive away, listen to that voice that's telling you to do whatever you have to do.
Well, I always, my husband was 82nd Airborne, and my father was a Vietnam vet. He was a tunnel rat.
Oh, okay.
And he was also a sharpshooter. And he's the one that taught me how to hunt, and he's the one that taught me about gut instincts and how to use them and to listen to them.
Yes.
Absolutely listen to them. He walked out of Vietnam with his tunnel rat buddy unscathed. And my husband, he was in the first war, Iraqi war. Actually, when Ayatollah Khomeini, when they had the hostage situation back in the 80s, or back in the 70s, in that area where Ayatollah Khomeini was, they claimed that we had him here as hostage, and they turned around and took one of our planes and held all those people hostage.
Yes, I remember.
Okay, my husband was one of the ones that on the 82nd Airborne that flew in there, that jumped into that area, and he used his instincts to do what his orders were, which I still don't know that I can tell you. He told me a little bit, but not much. Again, he used his instincts, and he knew when I was talking like that, he didn't marry me just because, I think he married me because I did like to hunt, and I did like to fish, and I did have good instincts, and I did know how to survive. And so he knew when I was talking like that to him that I was serious. And when we came back that last time and saw those cats, he said, okay. He said, that's enough. Enough. We're good. We're done. We sold everything. And we moved back to the city. And which is not really a city, but you know what I mean.
Some spouses, they just, when one says no, something's not right, that trust factor definitely is there, and so you just kind of listen up, especially if it's serious. You had enough insight. Now, I will tell you this. Of course, I can't prove that that's what your daughter saw, but I will say this. Out of the sightings that we've had, when people see these Bigfoot, for some reason, the red ones, or the auburn Bigfoot, tend to be more aggressive for some reason.
And that's another story I was going to go into. My husband, when he came back from, I forget what they call it. He went from regular Army to not National Guard, but Army Reserves. And when he had transferred from there to the reserve unit, and that allowed him to go back home, be closer to his family and stuff. And he and a bunch of his buddies in the early 80s, about 81, 82, they went out hunting along those same areas, along those same roads. And I cannot remember if it was street or street, but those streets are dirt roads. They're basically just country dirt roads at that time. And there was a trailer that one of his friends' dad owned, and they used it for hunting. Basically, you go out there, hunt, get up early in the morning, head out for deer hunting, that kind of stuff. So my husband and about 3 of his friends got together, went out there, and they were hunting, and they had several deer, and they had them hanging them up, dressing them out, that kind of stuff, and they had the carcasses there. Well, the one guy had not got his deer yet, so they left the carcasses hanging, and the next day they went out and were looking for another deer for him, And they said when they pulled back into the driveway, there was a wheat field that the wheat hadn't grown completely. It was still, it wasn't ready to cut yet. And they saw off in the distance something that looked red. It was large, but it was pretty far off in the distance. And they were looking at it like, is that a deer? Did we get lucky enough to have a deer right there? So one of the guys thought, well, yeah, that must be a deer. There's nothing that big other than a deer. It's still pretty far off, but I think I can get a shot. So he took a shot. And he doesn't know if he hit it or not. What he does know is that thing took off like a shot right at them.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Took off like a shot right at them. And they were like, holy crud, as it got closer, it's on 2 feet. It's running on 2 legs. And it's huge. So they got into that trailer. And he said that when they got into that trailer, they barricaded it down. And they said that thing attacked that trailer like you would not believe. Destroyed that trailer. It was a full-size trailer house, and it literally for hours and hours attacked and just destroyed that trailer. Beat the truck all to crud.
Oh wow! Wow!
annihilated that trailer.
Did they fire any
Now,
shots at it or anything? What happened? I mean, what?
He told me that they were just terrified. He said, I've been through all of this stuff. He said they tried to get off some shots at it. They don't know if they hit it. They didn't know. It just kept coming. This went on for hours and hours and hours. This thing just beat the living daylights out of that trailer. And said it got quiet.
Oh, really? Okay.
It got quiet. And they didn't want to go outside. I mean, they literally stayed in that trailer till the next morning. And they just stayed quiet. And the next morning, they managed to get the door open. It was pretty beat. And the truck was, the windows were broke out. It was dented, and I mean, it was, looked like it'd been through a tornado. But it drove. They said they looked around, said the deer carcasses were gone. The deer carcasses were gone. And they got in their truck and they left. Said when they got back to the guy whose dad owns that trailer, they had to try to explain to him what happened. And he didn't believe them. He'd never heard of anything like that in his life. So he basically told him, "You'll never go out there again. You totaled my trailer. I don't know what you did to my trailer. You totaled, look at your truck." He thought, I think he probably thought they were out there being good old boys. And just annihilated the trailer. He couldn't figure it out.
So he never did believe the guys.
No, he never did. I mean, who would?
Well, that's just it. I mean, how many of the guys were with your husband?
3.
Did they?
There was 3.
And what year was this again?
This would have been, I'm thinking it was before he and I met and married, so it would have had to been about 80 or 81 during deer season, rifle season.
Wow. So what did they finally conclude that this? What did they say? These 3 guys, or what your husband say that they thought it was finally?
He had no idea. He thought. Well, he told me he thought that it was from what he had read and seen in books and stuff at that time. He was pretty sure that it was a Bigfoot, is what he told me. And he said it, and I just looked at him funny, like, the only time I'd ever heard of Bigfoot was years ago. They had it was a movie my parents took me to at a drive-in theater. I can't even remember the name of it.
It was probably The Legend of Boggy Creek.
Actually, I think
it was The Legend of Boggy Creek. It came
maybe.
out in the 70s.
I just don't remember. I was really little at the time. And, I didn't even know where these things were. I didn't know if it was even a true story. That was the only thing that came to my mind. Is I remember some movie that they talked about a Bigfoot.
Right. That was the first. It was a docudrama, and it was filmed from some of the original true stories that came out of Falk, Arkansas. And so there was a rash of sightings, so some guys in Hollywood thought they would make a story out of it. They used locals to tell the story, but they dramatized it for Hollywood a little bit more. But the premise, there were some stories that were truthful that were coming out of that for a number of years down in those sulfur bottoms near the Boggy Creek. And so they made a movie out of it, and I believe it came out in '74. And it was The Legend of Boggy Creek, and it scared the living bejeebies out of me when I finally begged my dad to go see it. I didn't want to tell him that I had nightmares for 6 months. I was afraid of the dark.
I did too. And I think that's why I remembered it, because we had lived out on a farm in the country at the time, and my job was to get up early in the mornings and go feed the horses, and take care of the horses. And I can remember just thinking, oh, please don't let that monster be in there.
Exactly. Well, yeah. I mean, I think as kids, that was, anyone that's in their in their 40s or 50s, they remember that show very vividly. I mean, compared to the movies nowadays, it's pretty basic, very low budget, but it still scared the living bejeebies out of us. And so, with your husband, is that trailer, whose truck was it that got beat up?
It was a guy that his nickname is Peanut. I don't know why they call him that, but that was his nickname. His family's from Norway. They're Norwegians, and got to be really good friends with him and his mom and dad. And then the guys that owned the actual trailer and stuff like that, they were Swedish. And they owned all of that land out there and farmed it and hunted it for years. It's been in the family. And I'm trying to think if that was 12th or 13th down that way, but I really didn't really believe him, honestly. I'm not saying that he was a liar, but I figured maybe he was just trying to scare me or something.
Right.
He told me that story back in 1984. And I don't remember the full circumstances as to why he told me that, but Peanut used to come over and visit for a while, and his other friend that had hunted with him come over, and I think there was something to do with, it was getting deer hunting season, and he had asked this other guy if they wanted to go, and they both said no, don't want to go.
Oh, so they opted out. So
yeah, they apparently, the one just flat out said, I don't hunt anymore.
Whoa.
And the other one did not. I actually never saw him hunt either.
That happens quite a few times when people see these out in the wild where they're hunting, and they see this. Some of them reluctantly but force themselves to go back into the sport, but most of them, a lot of them I should say, not most of them, but a lot of them just hang it up. They hang up their bows, their guns, and I'm done.
Yeah, and that's really surprised me, because I was, my husband was an avid hunter and fisherman, and to have friends that didn't want to hunt and didn't hunt was, or didn't fish, just, that really threw me for a minute. I was like, well, what? I think that's how it got brought up was, well, what the heck's wrong with you guys?
Right. Well, it has to shake you to the core. And, when you see something that you've never seen before, doing something that you didn't know why it's doing it, and it's that big running at you, that shakes someone's world fast. And then to cause the havoc it did and just put fear, primordial fear, this raw fear, it doesn't... if it was out for 2 hours and it just destroyed this trailer and truck, I don't blame them. In many respects, that's a lot to take in. And when they have firearms in their possession and you're still that fearful to lock yourself in a trailer, there's
Yeah, it literally did. I mean, when I do remember when my husband started talking about that and what had happened, he just got up and left. He didn't even want to talk about it. He didn't want to hear it. Did a little bit, but he got real quiet. And shortly after the story was over, he left. He didn't want to stick around anymore. I still was like, so take me out to this trailer. I want to see the trailer. And my husband was like, well, I've been out by it several times if you want to do that. So one day we did. We got up, went out, drove out there, and he drove me by that trailer. And sure enough, that thing it really did look like a tornado had hit it.
Really?
It was all, yeah, it was beat all to pieces. The windows were broke out. I thought, well, maybe it's, I still kind of had this, I guess I just had this, I want to, I've got to see things to believe it.
Right.
And, I mean, yeah, it was beat really, really, I mean, bad, but it had been several years since that had happened, and I thought, well, time and vandals and stuff like that could have done the same thing, it just didn't really, I still just could not picture something that big in this flat land with tree lines here and there, despite all the water and all the fish and the rivers and, it was like, where would something like that hide?
Well, that's the big mystery, is that these things, our assumption, our belief, our understanding is that they can hide in plain sight. They don't need a lot to hide. They don't need an area very big to. Now they do need to eat quite often. I can only assume, based on how big they are, they have to have a large calorie intake. But
that is the one thing about that area, is it's loaded with all kinds of
wildlife,
birds, and
yep.
There's just everywhere.
So, plus,
everywhere.
Kansas is known for having a lot of crops. Of course, you've got corn and wheat, and then you got soybean in places, and probably there's farmers that actually plant a lot of watermelon. So it's actually an ideal spot. Now, it may not look like Colorado or southeast Oklahoma, but there's parts of Kansas that are still very woolly, like we were saying. But even with your open landfills, I mean, here's what we always say. If people only knew what roams out on the open plains and open fields at night in Oklahoma and Kansas and some of these other flat states, it would blow their minds. They'd never leave their house at night. I think, personally, I can't prove what I'm going to say, but my brothers and I personally believe that these Bigfoot and other creatures roam at night on these open plains, and the open, wide open, but you can't see them, obviously. People are not driving around with thermal cameras, right? So there's a lot of open terrain. They can cover a lot of miles in a night. And if you're going, think of the homesteads that have personal gardens, that have livestock, and that have sweet feed and corn and slopping hogs.
Over the years, living in that McPherson County, over the years, about once or twice a year, somebody will miss a bull. Their bull is gone. And it will have been stolen. And they do not find that bull again. Every once in a while we get stuff like that. I don't know if that even has anything to do with it, but every once in a while, it's almost like about fall, winter, somebody will come up, it'll be written in the paper, somebody's bull's missing, and it's gone. And I keep thinking, that I never found out, whether the bull was ever found, but it's a possibility. But, usually you would if something like that was found, or if they thought it was cattle rustlers, or if they had anything, how the newspapers are, they'll tell you stuff and they'll follow up on their stories generally. And there's never been that I can remember, a follow-up as to whether the bull was ever found or whether it was cattle rustlers or...
Counts where people will go missing, large heifers and steers and bulls. And I've had interviewed some eyewitnesses that this one gentleman swore up and down he saw a Bigfoot carrying his prize steer like over his shoulder, and he just was dumbfounded. This was at a distance, but he was missing a steer. But that day he saw they had the steer, and so this was back out east, and so he just could not believe what the heck. He didn't know what he was looking at first. It was at a distance, because with the steer and this Bigfoot, it was so huge of a mass, he didn't get it. It didn't process to him. So you're right. You could have, steer wrestlers and people stealing and load up a prize bull, and but on the other hand, if you've had sightings in this areas and they've been, some oddities have happened already, strangeness has happened, why not the possibility of one of these Bigfoot hauling off a prize bull? It's very possible. Very possible. Now, there's other possibilities as well we're not talking about here. I don't want to get too far off a tangent here, but there's been encounters where people will have visitation, and they'll swear by that as well.
Well, I was looking that up here several years back, and actually more along the Wichita, Sedgwick areas, there's big ranches. There's huge ranches, and there have been reports of mutilations and things like that. But yeah, those are those are in the archives of the newspapers and things like that. They are documented. And I don't know if that has anything to do with what's going on in our county, but it is just a couple of counties over. It's a county here and a county there, and I'm just not sure that, I don't know what to think of those.
Right. Well, there's a lot of interesting sightings that's animals missing, livestock especially, but it definitely...
I hate to blow it off, because, that would make me no different than the people that would blow me off.
Well, right. It's funny how people will say, well, I believe in Bigfoot, but I don't believe in these alien creatures from outer space, kind of things. And I'll say, well, here's the thing. I can't prove, but in the same token, I can't disprove. So yeah, I'm going to listen to everything. There's so many people that I have talked to that's had bizarre encounters that's not been with the Bigfoot or these Dogman creatures. I've not put them on the show. We're getting ready to create another channel. But I've had so many that unexplainable creatures, while people were hunting, that these creatures... You would have to call them an alien.
See, I've never had anything like that, but I did have my actual very, very first real encounter with a Bigfoot myself. And unfortunately, the one that saw, the son that saw Dogman, or Dogman, was with me.
Oh,
And
wow.
that's the one that gives, I have nightmares about him still. And I think it's because, like I said, when I lost my husband, I raised those kids pretty near on my own. I was only about 2 years old when his dad left us. And at the time when we had this encounter,